Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 27 of the Pet Behavior Chat. So, today's episode is all about punishment based training and why I personally feel that this type of training is extremely risky and has a number of downfalls. So, I'm going to start off by giving you a bit of a definition of what punishment is in a learning theory sense, in an operant conditioning sense. And then I'm going to take you through my top 10 kind of risks / downfalls of punishment-based training. Now, I'm pretty sure that there are more than 10. I'm just going to give you my top 10 and the things that I have encountered most frequently in my patients when they've been exposed to punishment-based training, obviously not by us, but previously. So, I'm gonna kick us off by giving a bit of a definition, and this is like I say, it's a theoretical definition. It's a definition that is based on Skinner's 4 quadrants of operant conditioning, and basically punishment means either the addition or the subtraction of something in order to decrease the likelihood of a behavior occurring again in the future. So when we're using punishment-based methods, the aim is always to decrease a behavior, right? We want to stop a behavior from occurring. And we can do that either by adding something to our training. So we usually would call that an aversive stimulus. So that could be a no, or a tap, or a hit, or a kick, or a shock collar, or any kind of sort of anything that you're adding to the situation in order to stop the behavior from happening again. Or we can take something away. Now, the taking something away is a little bit more difficult in the context of animals. So I'm going to give you a human example of that. So let's say, for example, you have a child that has a favorite toy, and it does something that you don't want it to do. So you will say to that child, if you do that again, that thing that I don't want you to do, I'm going to take away your favorite toy. So you're essentially subtracting something. So you're taking something away, you're taking that toy away in order to decrease that behavior that they're doing that you don't want them to do, to decrease the likelihood of them performing that behavior again. Now, as I mentioned, that second example, so the taking something away example, which is also known as negative punishment, is quite difficult in an animal setting because it requires some kind of understanding, some kind of verbal communication around it. So that's something that's far less used. And so we end up with the other form of punishment, which is where you add something to the mix in order to decrease the likelihood of that behavior occurring again. And I've already given you a number of different examples. So it would be shouting at, hitting, like I say, shocking. That's the kind of the ultimate example of that, adding an electric shock to a behavior in order to stop that behavior from occurring again. Now, punishment-based training is very popular for many different reasons, and it's popular because it is quite possible to inhibit behavior or to stop behavior or to, decrease behaviors from occurring quite effectively and quite quickly, and it's quite easy to get a short-term result, a short-term outcome. However, as I go through my downfalls and risks, it becomes evident that these are usually not sustainable techniques, modules, ways of doing things. And if you are a dog owner or a dog caregiver out there, or even indeed if you're a vet or a veterinary professional who is recommending trainers to pet parents or pet caregivers, I think it's really, really important to understand what types of techniques these people use, these trainers use. And if they use what we call aversive methods or punishment-based methods, or indeed if they call themselves balanced trainers, then I would probably recommend against using them. I would personally not recommend them because the damage that they can do can be quite substantial. Now, I just want to quickly go into this terminology of balanced trainer a little bit more. So balanced basically means using all 4 quadrants of the Skinner's operant conditioning model. So that is positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, positive punishment, and negative punishment. Now, when I say positive and negative in these contexts, I don't want you to think of that as good or bad. I want you to think of it in that mathematical way of adding something to the training or taking something away from the training in order to achieve the desired outcome. So sometimes that terminology can be a little bit misleading. So if you have any suspicion that anyone might be using punishment-based methods, aversive methods, or even balanced methods, then that's probably a professional that I would steer away from. Okay, so that's a little bit about the definitions. I hope they start to become a bit clearer as I go through my top 10 problems. The first one, so the first issue that we encounter a lot with punishment-based training is timing. Timing is everything, and it's extremely difficult to get the timing right when you are using punishment-based methods. Now, in order for punishment to achieve the desired outcome of reducing that particular behavior that you want to reduce, the punisher has to occur almost simultaneously with the behavior. So let's say you want to stop a dog from jumping up. Then you would give a punisher, let's say a tap on the nose or a hit on the head, in the exact moment that the dog jumps up. So the timing has to be absolutely spot on. If the timing is in any way off, if the punisher occurs after the event, after the behavior's occurred, the animal's not going to know what they're being punished for. And that can really cause them to feel anxious, unsure. The person becomes unpredictable. The training method becomes unpredictable. It doesn't make sense, and learning doesn't occur. And one of the most extreme examples of this that I've seen is coming home to find that the dog has soiled in the house. So you come home to a nice little present, either a puddle of wee or a pile of poop, and you punish the dog sometime after, we usually don't know exactly how long after, they've house soiled. So it could be that you leave the dog at 9 a.m. At 10 a.m. they house soil. You come home at 12 noon. That's when you discover that they've house soiled, and that's when they get punished. Well, 2 hours have elapsed between the dog actually house soiling and being punished for it. So the dog can in no way, shape, or form make an association between the behavior of house soiling and the punisher that is delivered for it. And so then what does the dog do? They start to associate the punishment for the behavior that they've just been doing. And that could be playing with a toy or lying calmly at home, or they can start to associate the punishment with the deliverer of that punishment, which is the person. It becomes unpredictable. They don't understand. They don't know what they're being punished for. The whole thing is completely ineffective, and there's no association made at all between house soiling and punishment. So the punishment is not going to have any kind of relevance or salience for that behavior. So that's something that we see frequently, right? And so even if there is just a short lag in between the behavior that's performed and the punisher, it's not going to make sense. It's not going to work. And consistently getting the timing of that absolutely spot on is almost impossible to achieve. So that's number one, timing. Number two is a little bit in the same vein, and it is, what behavior are you actually punishing? So let's go back to our example of the dog that's jumping up, and you want to stop that behavior by punishing them. Well, the dog might jump up at the same time. It might have wagged its tail. It might have turned its head slightly to the left. It might have barked in that moment. So there are multiple behaviors that are going on at one time. It's not just the jumping up, right? There are other behaviors that occur simultaneously, and the dog has almost no way of knowing which of those four things that they've just done, the jumping, the wagging, the turning of the head, the barking, whatever it might be, which of those four behaviors they're actually being punished for. So again, learning is very imprecise. It's very difficult. The dog can't discern, finds it very difficult to discern what the punisher has been applied to and has been applied for. And next time they might perform that same behavior and they might do jumping up plus 3 different things. They might lick their lips and maybe sneeze at the same time and maybe flap an ear. And again, they don't really know which of those behaviors they're being punished for. So the precision and the discernibility of the behavior that's being punished can be very, very difficult for animals to understand. And again, it makes it quite an unpredictable training method, and it can absolutely incite anxiety, frustration, fear, unpredictability, not knowing what to expect. Okay, that was number 2. Number 3 is punishers might need to be quite severe, because if you are consistently using low-level aversives, the animal might habituate to that, and the punisher might need to go to higher and higher and higher levels of punishment or severities of punishment to achieve an outcome. And a really classic example for this is no, 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 no. Constantly saying no to an animal for a behavior that they're not sure that, why they're being said no to, what exactly is the no for. And over time, you can imagine that animal just habituates to that no, because it loses importance. They don't know what the no is for. The no doesn't really have any consequence, and they just habituate to it. And habituation basically means that it becomes unimportant for them. It loses complete salience, and so all of a sudden the no doesn't work anymore. So now you might need to resort to a louder no, and then you might need to resort to a no plus a smack or something else. And that severity of punisher needs to get bigger and bigger and bigger to have any kind of desired effect. And we start to run into welfare implications, and we start to run into implications of abuse, physical abuse, verbal abuse of that animal. So that's another problem, is kind of the severity of the punisher and how that changes over time. Number 4, if you're punishing the animal and you're telling them to not do a behavior, you're also at the same time not telling them what behavior to do instead. So if you're shutting down a behavior, if you're punishing a behavior, that behavior is going to have to be replaced by something else. And if we're not clear in teaching the animal what we actually want them to do, it might be that they choose to replace that behavior with something else, and that might be just as unwanted by us, right? So rather than telling them which behavior we don't want them to do, we actually want to tell them very clearly which behavior we do want them to do. So that's where reinforcement comes in, right? We reinforce the behaviors that we want to see again. And in that way, we're communicating to the animal, yes, that's exactly what I wanted you to do, rather than to tell them, no, I don't want you to do that, but not actually replacing that with something that we do want them to do. So animals can't not behave. We can't give them a vacuum state, right? We can't tell them, no, you can't behave, and without actually telling them what we want to replace that behavior with. And that's something that gets forgotten about really often in punishment-based behaviors, is that we actually don't give clear communication about what we actually do want the animal to do. So that's number 4. What will the behavior be replaced with? Number 5, and here we start to cross into the realms, perhaps a little bit into sort of pathological behaviors. In some instances, it might not be possible to shut down a behavior. So I'm thinking, for example, about compulsive behaviors that are driven by a pathological state. So we have a couple, in the veterinary behavior world, we think about fly chasing or tail biting or consistent licking, over grooming, acrylic dermatitis, pacing, spinning, other types of repetitive behaviors that are true compulsive behaviors that have a pathological component to them. And it may not be possible to interrupt those behaviors or shut them down. Similarly, if we have behaviors that are very strongly motivated by emotional state, if an animal is consistently barking because they're fearful or they're frustrated or they're in a very sort of negative emotional state, punishing that behavior might actually make things worse. It likely won't be possible to stop those behaviors. And we are likely going to be putting that animal into an even worse emotional state, and that then again starts to have welfare implications. So you could imagine, let's say we have an animal who is doing repetitive spinning behaviors and it's a truly compulsive behavior. Well, you could shock that animal to within an inch of its life and it might still not be able to prevent that behavior from occurring again because it's a true pathological compulsive behavior. And so what we're actually doing is we are causing physical hurt and abuse to that animal and putting it into an extremely negative welfare state, instead of actually addressing the disease or the pathological state or the negative emotional function that behavior is being driven by. So that's a really important one to think about. Number 6, we're on number 6. Number 6 is a little bit kind of in a similar vein to this, and that is that punishment can lead to fear. It can lead to fear, anxiety, stress. It can lead to fear of the punisher. It can lead to anxiety overall because you're never really quite sure what might happen next and what behaviors you might be punished for. And I see this a lot with patients that have been previously exposed to shock treatment, because delivery of shock is, again, that timing piece can be very, very difficult to deliver properly. And all of a sudden, the animal is being shocked and they don't know why. They can't really pinpoint the behavior that they're being shocked for because of the timing. And 1 minute that the animal might think, God, did I just receive that shock for lifting my paw? Did I just receive that shock for turning my head to the left? Did I just receive that shock for shifting my body weight forward? And it can be really, really difficult for them to discern. And that, as you can imagine, causes a massive state of anxiety, unpredictability. And it's these patients that live in this sort of state of unpredictability that can develop really, really serious behavioral issues, including quite severe aggressive behaviors. And sometimes it can also cause a state of learned helplessness because they just go into shutdown because they think, well, no matter what I do or don't do, a shock might be coming anyway. And they just start to shut down. And again, that's an extremely negative welfare state. So that's fear, anxiety, stress. Now we come to number 7. And number 7 is a little bit looking at things from the lens of the punisher. So punishment can be hugely reinforcing for the punisher. And that is because as a punisher, you might feel a sense of control. You might feel a sense of being able to control behaviors, shut down behaviors in certain situations or contexts. And that in itself can be massively reinforcing for the punisher. And it can cause the punisher to not look beyond that, to not look beyond the operant, to not think about physical health, mental and emotional health, negative emotional state, motivations that might be driving behaviors. It causes the punisher to stay within a very narrow lens because it can intrinsically be quite reinforcing for the punisher. So that's something to think about, I guess, more from the human perspective, from the perspective of the person delivering the punishment. Number 8, and this is a big one. Punishment damages the human-animal bond and relationship. Essentially, if we have a relationship, a human-animal relationship that is based on punishment and is based on inequality within the relationship and is based on one member of that relationship exerting pressure, control, coercion over the other, then that's not a healthy relationship. And that fractures that all-important human-animal bond. And we all know how important that human-animal bond is to the majority of pet parents and pet caregivers. The whole reason for having a pet is to experience this amazing human-animal relationship, this relationship based on trust, this two-way relationship that enriches our lives, that enriches hopefully the pet's life, that enriches families' lives in so many ways, that can cause all these really positive physical health benefits for people. All those major things that we know of when we're thinking about the human-animal bond. And of course, a relationship based on punishment is going to fracture that. And that for me is terribly sad. And that, again, I see time and again when clients come to me after perhaps they've, been working with a punishment-based trainer, or they've been told to do these punishment-based things that in the majority of times they don't actually feel comfortable doing. It's just that they're desperate and they have been given advice by a professional, in inverted commas. And so, of course, they're going to follow that advice. But somehow, somewhere deep inside, their gut feeling tells them that actually this punishment-based training is not really what they want to be doing. It doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel right for the relationship that they have with their pet. And they feel bad. They feel bad. They feel guilty. They feel guilty for doing the punishment, but they do it because that's what they've been told to do and because they believe that that's the right thing to do. So it's damaging in many ways, I think, for the human-animal bonding relationship, but also for the pet caregiver's own mental and emotional health. It can be quite damaging. So, it is definitely something to really think about. And it's, to me, one of the biggest problems and one of the biggest downfalls of punishment-based training methods is this fracturing of the human-animal relationship. Okay, that brings me to my penultimate point, which is punishment can actually lead to aggressive behaviors. Punishment can lead to aggression. We know this. We know that animals, if they're in a severe enough emotional state and they experience punishment, they are going to want to react defensively. They're going to want to protect themselves, and that might include aggression. So again, many of my clients report that if in the past they have used physical punishment, the dog might retaliate and come back and actually snap at them. So punishment-based anxiety or punishment-based aggression is sometimes part of my diagnosis list. And again, that's, a really sad state of affairs if, what we're actually trying to do is solve behavior problems and change behavior. And in turn, by using punishment-based methods, we're actually making behaviors worse, or we're even creating behaviors that we don't want. Then that's definitely not what we want to be doing. And as well as leading to aggressive behaviors, punishment can lead to learned helplessness. So I touched on learned helplessness a second ago, but I think it's worth mentioning here again in point number 9 is that punishment-based training can cause some severe behaviors that we don't want to see. And that learned helplessness is can be a result of punishment when the animal actually just gives up, essentially, because they don't know the rules, they don't understand the consequences, they don't know which behaviors are causing the punisher to punish them. And they kind of just go into this state of learned helplessness, which we know is an extremely negative welfare state. Which leads me very nicely to my final point, and that is that punishment negatively impacts welfare. From whichever angle or lens you look at it through, I think it always comes back to a negative welfare state. I have seen negative physical welfare. I've seen animals that have been strung up essentially by their leashes, strung up by their necks and whirled around as a punisher. I have heard of animals that have actually experienced neurological damage because of this type of punishment-based training. I've heard of animals that have been alpha rolled, have been rolled on their sides or pinned to the floor, that have actually caused them to have musculoskeletal injuries. So we're talking about potential physical negative welfare, but also we're talking about negative mental and emotional welfare, right? that creation of fear, anxiety, stress, unpredictability, learned helplessness, all the things that we think about when we think of negative mental and emotional welfare states, and that all important fracture of that very delicate human animal bond and relationship. So that sums up my top 10. Like I said, I can probably think of 5 more just off the bat. 5 other negative consequences or problems or pitfalls or downfalls of punishment-based training methods. So I really want you to think about, if you're listening to this and if you have ever been told, or if you are currently being told by a professional or somebody that calls themselves a professional to do any of these things, then I want you to please think again. I want you to think that there are better methods out there. And by the way, a lot of this has a lot of scientific research and backing. I'm going to dig out probably a couple of papers and put them in the show notes, a few references where actually, studies have been done to compare both aversive and non-aversive training methods and the results that have come from that. And obviously, the non-aversive, the positive training methods show to have better learning effects and be overall much more effective, or at least as effective as punishment. So yeah, if you are currently in a state where you are being told, or you are using, or you have been told to use anything that might feel to you like it's a punisher, or if you are currently being told, or if you ever have been told by a trainer to do something that just in your gut has not felt right or doesn't feel right, then stop, think, pause, take a moment to think, research alternatives, get in touch with us. There are absolutely so many better and different ways of doing things out there that you absolutely do not have to rely on punishment as a way of interacting with your pet. And I've been talking a lot about dogs in this podcast episode, right? But the same applies, of course, to cats, to horses, to any other animals that we might be sharing our lives with. Birds, rabbits, guinea pigs, hamsters, you name it. Everybody is subject to having those types of behaviors, those types of training methods enforced on them. But obviously it's most common amongst dogs and maybe cats. So have a think about it. Water sprayers in cats are a classic punisher, right? Using something, so adding something to the mix, i.e. a water sprayer, to try and reduce behaviors from occurring again. And water sprayers can be really quite distressing and fear-evoking for cats, and can be really scary. So not just dogs, although I've spoken mainly about dogs, but yeah, something, food for thought, something to think about. If you have any questions, if you have any comments, please drop me a line, leave it in the comments, either on the podcast player or in our social media, on our social media platforms. And yeah, that's it on today's episode. So I'm going to see you next week for episode number 28. If you would like to hear a little bit more about dominance, which sometimes goes hand in hand with punishment, have a listen back to episode 25, where I talk a lot about the dominance theory and rank reduction training programs, which are punishment-based programs. So if you want to listen to more, episode 25 is a good one to go to. All right, that's it for now. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you next week for episode 28. Bye for now.